Hello guys, what's up? Sorry I haven't uploaded any World of Warcraft content in a while. I kind of quit the game. And the reason why, long story short, basically what happened is my Cataclysm guild died because my guild leader got his wife pregnant a bunch of times, and then he no longer felt like he had time to lead the guild anymore. And this really made me upset at the time. Like, it completely tilted me off the face of the earth. I ended up messaging him on Discord after he broke the news to everyone. And I was like, dude, your fucking pullout game is trash. Like, have some goddamn self control. This is embarrassing. Like, the pussy ain't that good. Let's be real. Like, there ain't no fucking way. So, because of his foolishness, not only has he ruined his own life, but he's screwed over all of us in the process. So, thanks a lot. Anyways, the point is, there will be no more Cataclysm content, if you haven't figured that out already. I will, however, make a Mists of Pandaria healing video somewhere down the line, but that won't be for a while. On another note, I am doing a tanking guide today, which is something that I've never done before, and will probably never do again since this channel is very much dedicated to healing related content. But one thing you should know about me is that while healing is my favorite thing to do in WoW, I do also absolutely love dungeon tanking. And I especially love dungeon tanking in vanilla. And why is that, you might ask? Well, it's because of how unique tanking is in vanilla compared to all of the WoW expansions. And to be quite frank with you, the only reason I'm playing vanilla WoW is to tank lower level dungeons. I have zero interest in any other part of the game. I don't care about questing or raiding or professions or PvP. I don't even have any interest in DPSing or healing. It's the uniqueness of tanking in vanilla WoW and the depth that it has, which really draws me in to play this game once again. So, the way I would describe dungeon tanking in vanilla is it's hard to learn and hard to master, and it's also very punishing and frustrating if you play badly, which is a particularly lethal combination. Essentially, what that means is that there will inevitably be an enormous tank shortage for lower level dungeons, which is why, as a game developer, you wouldn't want to design tanks in this way. It's just not good for the overall health of the game. But with that said, I love it. Personally, for me, for the type of player that I am, this is exactly what I enjoy in video games. I absolutely love it when the combat has a lot of depth, a lot of decision making, and more specifically, I love it when all of the little decisions you make are actually impactful. I also enjoy when it isn't immediately obvious how you're supposed to play the class. And in order to figure out how to play the class, you have to dig a little bit deeper. For example, in Vanilla WoW, tanks are given a ton of spells, but only a few of those spells are actually worth using often. Some spells are garbage initially, but will eventually become worth it as you level up or acquire gear, whereas some other spells are permanently garbage. There's also spells that are good, but only in specific niche situations, and then there's spells that are good all the time. This, to me, is an interesting way of designing the classes because it's kind of like a noob trap. Most players are going to try and use all of their spells that are given to them by default, but a good player will be able to figure out which spells are worth using and which spells are not. Rarely in Classic WoW will a class be designed in a way where you have to utilize all of your spells or even all of your core spells. Now, I find this interesting, but things are actually even more interesting than that because the core gameplay elements that exist in Vanilla WoW heavily reward good resource management, good awareness, and of course, good decision making, which I mentioned already. For example, rage builds up very slowly in vanilla, which means the optimal way to play is to pool your rage. Because if you're in a dungeon and you run into combat with no rage, you're screwed. It's actually shocking how many tanks I've grouped up with that have no concept of pooling rage, which is unfortunate because it's extremely important. And another important thing to know is that all of your abilities and auto attacks have a high chance of missing, dodging, or parrying in vanilla WoW. In every other expansion, this aspect of the game wouldn't really impact your gameplay very much, but in vanilla, since threat is so difficult to acquire and maintain, a single auto attack or spell that doesn't land can mean the difference between you having aggro and not having aggro. So this is something you would need to be cognizant of when you're tanking. This aspect of the game also influences your weapon choice. If you're using a slow one-hander or, God forbid, a two-hander to tank dungeons, and you miss one or two auto attacks in a row, you are in trouble, especially if you didn't pool your rage before the pull. So to alleviate this issue, I prefer to use a dagger when I tank if possible. It just makes rage generation much more consistent and reliable. Now let's go over some decision making. Here's an example of a decision that you could make during combat that would be very impactful. The decision to only generate as much threat as you need to. Pretty much every tank I've ever grouped with sucks at doing this. But this is a really important detail because imagine how effective of a tank you could be if you not only pooled your rage properly, but also spent the minimum amount of rage required in order to maintain aggro. Another example of a decision that is impactful is the decision to use threat generating abilities before pressing taunt or after pressing taunt. What taunt does in vanilla is it gives you the same amount of threat as the person who is highest on the threat table, which means if a DPSer in your group is generating a fuck ton of threat, let's say a shaman is using Earth Shield often or a mage is blizzarding, you might not have to spend all of your rage trying to out-threat them. You could instead choose to not spend any rage and wait until they have a big aggro lead over you, and once that happens, you would use taunt to steal all of their threat, and then afterwards start generating threat of your own. This is especially good to do against mages. Watch this clip here. Notice how the mage has gotten aggro off of me, but I'm not pressing taunt immediately. Instead, I'm waiting for the mage to accumulate threat with Blizzard as the enemy is slowly running towards him. And then right after the enemy runs out of the blizzard, that is when I press taunt, which means I took all of that mage's threat that he just built up and can now spend a little bit of rage to generate some threat of my own. Another thing to be aware of is healer mana. Healer mana is very tight in vanilla WoW, and this impacts the game in a couple ways, but for starters, it forces the tank to stop pulling mobs, which is a stark contrast to retail WoW, where the tank will try to run through the dungeon as quickly as possible. They will keep pulling and pulling and pulling, and it'll never stop because healers in retail aren't limited by mana. The second effect of healer mana being tight is it incentivizes tanks to maximize their survivability in most circumstances. Because if you can survive really well, you'll have way less downtime between pulls, and you'll be able to deal with mistakes easily, which is really important in vanilla because pulling an extra mob or an extra pack of mobs in these dungeons can very easily mean a wipe. Keep in mind that it is inevitable that you will pull extra mobs at one point or another in these dungeons, especially in pugs. But if you are good at maximizing your survivability, then you set yourself up in the best possible way to deal with these kind of situations and improve the overall pace of your runs. I actually watched a fairly popular tanking guide from 2019 where the guy recommended for tanks to just tank the entire dungeon with a two-hander. This, in my opinion, is absurd for a bunch of reasons, but the main reason being that it completely goes against what I just explained to you about the importance of maximizing your survivability. So I do not recommend that you do this. Lastly, before we get into the VOD analysis section of the video, let me show you the spec I plan on leveling up with. This is the spec that I'm going to go for, and I'm going to head down the prot tree first and take all the threat talents that are obviously very good, and then I'll head over to the fury tree and most likely prioritize the threat generating talents over the defensive talents, as I feel like threat will be the biggest hurdle while leveling up. Now, some of you might believe or have been told that going down the arms tree so that you can stance is a good idea. And it's certainly possible that nearing level 60 it could be a good thing to do, at max level. If you're raiding, it's probably the correct choice as well. But in low level dungeons, I just absolutely detest the idea of stance dancing because it prevents you from pooling your rage, which in my mind is one of the most important things to do in low level dungeons. Also, I prefer to stay in defensive stance for survivability reasons. Anyways, here's how this is going to work. I'm going to play some footage of me tanking Wailing Caverns as a warrior, and I'll talk through my decision making as it's happening. At the end of the video, I will talk a little bit about Druid tanking as well, although I haven't leveled up my Druid yet, so you'll have to take that part with a grain of salt. Here we go. Alright, here's the start of the dungeon, and I start off with dual wield because it's just a singular trash enemy. When there's more than one trash enemy, I always go sword and shield. I don't use dual wield. If there's one trash enemy, you can use it to build rage really quickly with dual wield. So that's why I'm dual wield right now. And here comes two enemies. I run in. I always use demoralizing shout first just to reduce the incoming damage. And then I don't even sunder the ectoplasm. I just use revenge on it, and that revenge generates a lot of threat. So I don't even need to sunder the ectoplasm in order to maintain aggro. I do use one sunder on the Ravager, and that's also enough to keep aggro. And notice how I'm trying to do as little as possible. I'm not really pressing any spells here, I'm just trying to generate rage. So I go into this next combat with a lot of rage, and now I'm going to get even more rage because I go dual wield again and generate my rage all the way to full on this one enemy here. Or almost to full. And now I know there's two enemies coming up, so I switch back to sword and shield. Or dagger and shield. And just one sunder on each, nothing too crazy. I use revenge on skull, and I lost aggro on that one somehow. I assume that was from multi-shot, although I'm not really sure. But I just taunt it, so it's fine. And again, trying not to spend too much rage. I probably go dual wield, yep. I'll dual wield again. And now I have a full bar of rage, which is really good because now we're getting ganked by a bunch of raptors and a caster enemy. I try to line of sight. Well, I get aggro on these raptors first, and I try to line of sight behind this pillar here, hoping that the healer would follow me, but he didn't. So now I'm running out to interrupt this guy, and I pull this one as well because he's right here. And now I'm just trying to keep aggro on all these. I should have war stomped sooner to interrupt that slumber that happened, but I was too slow. And now the mage is going to start AoEing, so he put a flame strike down, and now he's blizzarding. And I lose aggro on this one, lose aggro on this one as well from the blizzard. What I should have done is I should have taunted the ectoplasm, but instead I taunted the caster, which was a bad idea because now I can't get aggro on this one anymore. I don't have enough rage to really get aggro. So that's unfortunate, and then we get ganked again by these two raptors, and now this is a really bad situation. See, we have three enemies on the screen. I don't have aggro on any of them, so I'm in dual wield, desperately trying to get aggro. I use taunt on this one, and then I'm still dual wield. I'm missing a whole bunch, and I finally have aggro on these two, so I switch back to sword and shield. There we go. And I get aggro on this one, and now I have aggro again on everything. And now I'm just trying to build my rage up again because I'm at low rage. And as you can see, it was a messy pull. A bunch of stuff like ganked us, but as long as you spend as little rage as possible on each individual enemy and pool your rage before combat starts, you'll get through it in one piece. Here's the next section I would like to show you. And we start off getting rage from this ectoplasm here. Nothing too crazy. I'm in dual wield. Swap back to sword and shield because there's a big pack of 3 here. So I start sundering and demoralizing shout. Keep sundering. And I've generated a lot of threat by doing this. I'm using revenge as well, I would hope. Yep. Shield block too. There's shield block. And as you can see, since I spread out all my auto attacks, I spread sunders around on everybody, I used revenge a bunch, I was actually able to keep aggro off of the mage on all 3 of these enemies, even though the mage used blizzard pretty early on. So that worked out pretty well, and I still have enough rage to go into the next pack, which I'm going to do now, since I see this guy creeping in. So I sunder him, I pull this one from ranged, because why not? And we just kind of deal with these pretty quickly. lose aggro on the ectoplasm, and I actually lose aggro on the ectoplasm again from the healer. Look at that. 2 wraths from the healer, and I can't pull aggro off him, even though I'm dual wielding. And I have 2 sunders into the ectoplasm. The healer still has aggro. That's pretty crazy. Don't really understand why that happened. Maybe healers just do big damage. And nothing too crazy here, just building my rage back up. Let's speed it up, get to the next section. Get through that guy, just building my rage, building my rage. Get these 2 here, nothing crazy. The shaman is using Rock Biter. I don't know if you can see, but it's kind of annoying. He just hit this guy with Rock Biter and took aggro, so I had to take aggro back by sundering this guy twice. But that's okay. Let's speed it up again. And then these ones kind of just pull by themselves because vanilla is weird. And I can't keep aggro off of this one because the shaman is like hitting it with Rock Biter. So I pumped 3 sunders into it. I shouldn't have pumped 3 sunders into it. I should have just waited for the shaman to get like a lot of aggro and then press taunt. That way I wouldn't have to spend as much rage. So you see now I'm trying to build up my rage because I just spent so much. So that was a little mistake on my part, but also the shaman didn't attack Skull, so I don't completely blame myself. And now here's the boss. So I come into range here to use Demoralizing Shout from max range to get this guy. And then I start spreading sunders around. Hold on. I want you to watch this. See how I parry that sunder, and I am cognizant of that parry, so I sunder again immediately after on the boss. And now I start spreading a sunder around. I lose aggro on the boss, so I taunt. And then I revenge the boss because I'm still almost losing aggro. And now it's fine. The mage starts to use Blizzard. And watch what I do here. See, I wait for the mob to run through the Blizzard and then I press taunt. I don't press taunt immediately. I want the mage to build up aggro from the Blizzard and then I press taunt to take all of that aggro. And now I'm just kind of doing what I can with the rage that I have. Blizzard is a hard spell to keep aggro from because it just does so much threat. I had to pump 5 sunders into this one to get aggro on it. It's pretty crazy. But I suppose that was the best you could hope for in that kind of a situation. Okay, so for this part, the healer is low on mana, so I'm trying not to pull too much before he has a chance to sit down and drink. I use Blood Rage out of combat because Blood Rage stops your rage decay. You ideally don't want to use Blood Rage in combat because it hurts you and, you know, it helps keep your rage up when you're out of combat. So I always use Blood Rage out of combat. And while the healer is drinking, you can just pull one enemy and tank it, it's fine. The healer will just continue on drinking while everyone kills this one here. So we do that. I'm going to skip through that, just building up rage so that I can run in here and pull this big pack. Here we go, Sunder. Mark that one with Skull. Just kind of spreading my Sunders around, trying to keep aggro on all this. I'm doing a pretty good job of it, just spending my rage. And the mage starts using Blizzard, so I'll probably lose aggro on something here. Yep, I lose aggro on that, so I taunt it. I almost lose aggro on this one, but I used Sunder on it. Or I tried to use Sunder on it, but it missed, so I used Revenge instead. And that was actually pretty clean. Didn't really lose aggro too much there, that was good. And I go into this next combat with a full bar of rage. Even while fighting like 6 enemies back there, I still have a full bar of rage going into the next pack. Nothing crazy happening here. I see this one is coming, so I shoot it from range here. I back up and then I shoot it. And something interesting happens after that one dies. You'll see the shaman, he doesn't notice that this enemy here, this caster, is coming towards us, so he accidentally runs forward and pulls it. Yeah, like that. So as soon as I see that the shaman accidentally pulled this, I just run in there and try to get control of the situation. So here I go, I shield bash this to try and get everything clumped up. I Demoralizing Shout into a War Stomp. Start getting aggro on this guy. I see that the mage sheep that. And I lose aggro on all the snacks here, so I just run after those, try to get aggro on all these, which I do. And then I come over here, I try to interrupt this cast, but then I see that this one is coming. I probably should have just let this guy go because he was almost dead. And at this point, I see this is casting, so I try to interrupt it and bring it out so that I'm not line of sighting the healer. And then I run after this one as well because it slipped past me, and now I have aggro on all three of these enemies. So that whole thing was pretty messy, but overall it worked out just fine. Interrupted that slumber there. And yeah. That turned out pretty well, all things considered. Anyways, I think you get the point of what I'm trying to show you, so I might as well end the VOD analysis by showing you the second last boss, the guy that hits really hard. So here's the third last boss. He's about to die. And I'm going to try to build up rage for the last boss here, because you have to kill the boss really quickly. So I want to build up enough rage so I can just get a whole bunch of threat right away. And an interesting thing you need to know about the last boss, let's just fast forward a little bit. Okay, an interesting thing you need to know about this guy is that he auto attacks pretty slowly, so you can actually shield block most of his auto attacks. So you make sure that you are just spamming shield block on this guy. I'll show you what it looks like. So here I go, I have a decent amount of rage, and I just use shield block right away. Here I go. There, so I shield block that one. Not taking too much damage. Shield block again. And you can see the auto attacks on my character. So there's an auto attack. There's an auto attack. There's an auto attack. Like, you see the auto attacks are pretty slow, so you can shield block like at least 50% of them. And if you do that, I mean, you won't take that much damage, although sometimes you can get unlucky. Like I once got crit twice in a row for 60% of my health, and I just died. And that was really annoying. So you can get unlucky, but if you use shield block, then it'll be fine. And I did roll on this shield. I didn't ninja loot it from the shaman. He didn't need it. But hopefully nobody sees that I'm using an intellect shield as a warrior, because that'll be kind of cringe. But it technically is better than my white turtle shell shield that I'm using right now. Now, one last thing before I talk about Druid. Sometimes you'll have players in your group who are quote-unquote dumbass motherfuckers. These individuals will play so bad that it will seem like they're purposefully trying to make your life a living hell. For example, I had a DPS warrior in my group who was probably one of the worst players I have ever seen. He charges enemies before I can hit them a single time. He hardly ever attacks Skull, even if I mark it before combat starts. He uses Mocking Blow off CD. He even uses it on that boss in Wailing Caverns who hits really hard. And he was also 3 levels above me, so I wasn't able to ignore his presence in the group, which was really annoying. Shamans also tend to be annoying because some of them will use Earthshock and Rockbiter weapon, which is really hard to keep threat against. My recommendation to you when there are people like this in your group is to just do your best. With good play, you can deal with people not attacking Skull most of the time, so just try not to let it get to you. But also don't be afraid to give up on trying to keep aggro on a specific enemy if you feel like it's not worth it. Sometimes you just have to know when it's no longer feasible to get aggro. So for example, if a shaman in your group is using Rockbiter weapon and you have to sunder something 5 times in order to get aggro, don't. Just let the shaman tank it. And in the case of someone straight up pulling enemies before you get to them, all you have to do is run past them and pull the next one.
Nope.
A lot of tanks in this game get extremely mad when a DPSer starts pulling mobs, but why do you have to be mad? You can literally just run past them. Now let's talk about Druid tanking. So I've never actually played a Druid in vanilla, nor have I ever played a vanilla private server, and I didn't even play vanilla back in 2019. I did play vanilla back in 2005, but obviously I was very young. So my experience with Druid tanking is actually from the TBC pre-patch. I did level up a Druid during that time, and in the TBC pre-patch, Swipe got buffed a little bit, although I don't know how much that buff affected low-level tanking, probably not that much. And also in the pre-patch, Maul got significantly nerfed. So my strategy for keeping AoE threat was to just never use Maul. Instead, I would dump all of my rage with Swipe and try to land an auto attack on each enemy in the pack, since bear auto attacks are very strong. They're not like warrior auto attacks where you're just tickling the mob's wieners to death. Bear auto attacks actually do a shit ton of damage and threat. Now, is this the strategy that I would use in vanilla? Well, I doubt it. I suspect a better strategy would be to use Swipe as little as possible, maybe only once or twice for initial threat on the pull. And then afterwards you would use Maul a single time on 1 or 2 enemies. And then, after you've done that, you would spend the rest of the fight just spreading your auto attacks around. One thing to know is that you will not be able to use Maul like a warrior uses Sunder Armor, at least in the early levels, because Maul demolishes your rage bar. Not only are you spending rage casting Maul, but you're also losing rage from the auto attack that Maul just consumed. So unless you're fighting a boss, you need to use both Maul and Swipe as little as possible so that you can generate enough rage from auto attacking to go into the next pack with a full bar of rage. And that, my friends, is the end of the video. Thank you for watching. I do hope that this video helps some people, because I'm fully aware that tanking in vanilla is probably incredibly frustrating and miserable for most players. But hopefully this video will give you some level of appreciation for the chaotic but fascinating design of vanilla WoW dungeon tanking. Bye-bye.